All right, we are live. Folks, what if global war doesn't look like it used to? It's not tanks and planes anymore, but it's more like hybrid warfare. I've talked about this a lot in the past, and we're going to touch on it today because it's germane to the conversation about what's happening in the Middle East right now, the war that's ongoing between Israel and Hamas, the Houthis, Iran, Hezbollah, etc., and the people who back all those different sides. So, as I've mentioned, in World War II, only states could wage global war. You had to have a huge army, massive spending. In 2025, things are different. To wage war, even against a state with a massive army and lots of money, you can do that with asymmetric tactics, and you can not just disrupt that country through insurgency, but you can disrupt the entire globe's just-in-time logistics system. And that's exactly what we've seen the Houthis do very successfully. Now, as you know, President Trump announced that the Houthis have agreed to a ceasefire with the United States, and that ceasefire means that the Houthis have said they won't target American shipping anymore in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. So President Trump said, victory, we're done, bye, and shut everything down. It's very clear that President Trump is extremely reticent to use military force, and when he's forced to do so, he doesn't like it one bit and looks for any reason to get out of using that force. But the Houthis have continued to fight against Israel. Israel, who thought the United States was coming over to the Middle East with large amounts of military force to support them, to support Israel against not just the Houthis, but Iran and even against Hamas if necessary, is now kind of wondering, wait a minute, were you just here to come make a deal with these camel jockeys in Yemen to keep them from shooting at American ships? I mean, there are not a lot of American ships that go through that region. So if the United States is going to declare the Houthis to be honorable people, which is what President Trump said, and then just shut it off, where does that leave the Israelis? And this is a conundrum, a dilemma that our adversaries in the region and elsewhere are going to leverage against us. So this is important to understand. Now, we're also going to be talking about Saudi Arabia. We're going to be talking about the president's visit there to Saudi Arabia. And we're going to be looking at how that plays into this global conflict, especially in terms of what does Saudi Arabia have to offer in this conflict, and why have they been so sort of aloof, sort of cagey in terms of their participation. So we're gonna go through all of that. And I think you're going to learn something today about Saudi Arabia, get a little better understanding of how these dynamics work and what President Trump is up against as he goes to meet with the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qataris in the Middle East this week. Now, one other visit that President Trump might make on this trip, on the backside of it, depending on how things go between Ukraine and Russia, is he might actually stop into Istanbul and meet with President Erdogan. President Erdogan is not a good person. And, this is akin to meeting with Kim Jong-un or even Vladimir Putin himself. And so I'm not sure that's a good look for America. But the reason is because he wants to encourage the peace negotiations, or lack thereof, between Ukraine and Russia, which are taking place in Turkey are supposed to take place on Thursday. As I mentioned when I did a live about this on CBN the other day, I don't think President Putin has any desire whatsoever for peace unless that peace comes with the destruction of Ukraine. And that's obviously a non-starter for the Ukrainians, so there's a lot of daylight there between their two positions. However, President Putin is happy to play the game and keep stringing them along to make the United States think that they're acting in good faith, when in reality they're not. That was one of the reasons why this group of 20 European countries, including Canada, UK, and Germany, and everybody, got together and went to Kyiv, met with Zelensky, and then stood up and basically called Putin's bluff and said, if you care about peace, if you care about stopping the killing, then you'll agree to a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. To which Putin said, how about no? So let's back up and let's talk some more about the Gaza conflict and what's happening there now, okay? So as of yesterday, of course, the last American Israeli hostage was released. His name is Adon Alexander, was released about 6 p.m. local time yesterday. Reunited with his family. He is in such a condition that he needs to spend some time in the hospital to recover. He looked very happy and he was walking under his own power, so that's good. Obviously, had lost some weight since he spent 586 days in captivity. And immediately when he was released, Steve Witkoff was right there and, was basically doing everything he could to take credit for this for the Trump administration. But I'm not sure that this came about for any reason whatsoever, except for the fact that Hamas is trying to drive a wedge between Israel and the United States. They saw that little crack. They saw that sort of flare up between Trump and Netanyahu, and they pounced on that. And they figure that by releasing this hostage, it makes them look like the reasonable party here, while Israel is gearing up for a much larger offensive into Gaza. And they're basically trying to curry favor with Trump, and they figure, why not? He likes every other one of our adversaries. America's enemies seem to be people that Trump likes to deal with and talk to and call honorable. So if he would call the Houthis honorable, then Hamas is like, hey, maybe there's hope for us. So we'll release this hostage, the last American Israeli hostage. Now, I'm not saying that's it's bad that this guy got released. Of course not. But I'm saying that it's indicative of the way our adversaries are starting to see the American administration, which is not, they don't relate to the Trump administration out of fear. They might have at the beginning because he was talking a really good game. But now what they've seen is that President Trump doesn't really follow through on all of his bold pronouncements, that all hell will be unleashed in Gaza if they don't release all of the prisoners by this Saturday. Well, that didn't happen. And the threats he made against the Houthis, we didn't really hurt the Houthis all that bad. They're still fighting against Israel. Did in 58 days of bombing. And so the way that these adversaries, these enemies of ours, are now looking at the Trump administration is, I think, they're saying this is a game to be played. We can play this game and we can win. Now, I would love it if I was proven wrong on that. And President Trump brought the hammer down on Iran, for example, and just absolutely decimated their nuclear program. But we'll have to wait and see if that actually happens. Israel is preparing to bring the hammer down on Gaza, without a doubt. The Gideon's Chariots is the name of the new operation against Hamas. Now, Hamas is going to counter that because they're much smaller, much weaker, but they possess something that Israel does not, and that is a complete lack of morality. They have absolutely no scruples whatsoever when it comes to waging war against Israel. And so they will leverage that with hybrid attacks, using human shields, the information warfare of, playing the victim while you're the one that's holding the hostages, tunnels, drones, etc. A manufactured humanitarian disaster in Gaza, manufactured by the fact that Hamas has tons of food and is intentionally not giving it out to the people so that the people will be hungry, so that will cause more pressure to be put on Israel. Negotiating in bad faith, all of this wrapped up together equals hybrid war. And that's why Gaza is kind of the extreme laboratory of modern hybrid warfare, because Gaza shows the world how a small, weak band of fighters can stand up to and hold off a much larger nation state force with tanks and jets and drones and everything else. The Houthis have done the same thing. Their insurgent navy is made up of small speedboats, anti-ship drone boats, missiles that they got from Iran, and some cheap drones. And they've really written a new insurgent playbook for how to disrupt global trade. This is, as I've mentioned before, the global equivalent of protesters going out and standing in the freeway and shutting down the freeway, punishing people who have nothing to do with whatever they're mad about, just to make a point, just to get some publicity. The Houthis now have taken that to a whole new level by going and essentially standing in the middle of the Bab el-Mandab Straits and stopping the ships from going through there with a vastly inferior force to what the United States Navy brings to bear over there. But doesn't matter, because they've managed to do it. And by provoking the United States to come and strike at their giant dirt parking lot over there, what they've done is raised their own status among the axis of resistance. They've become the cool kids on the block. And there's a lot of privilege that goes with that in the terrorist realm. We saw this with the Islamic State. When the Islamic State started publicizing their atrocities in Syria and Iraq, you saw other Islamic State kind of wannabes popping up all around the world, because all of a sudden ISIS was getting all of the publicity because of their complete lack of morality and their absolute brutal tactics. And a lot of other terrorist groups like the Moro Islamic Liberation Front in the Philippines, for one, and what became ISIS Khorasan in Afghanistan, they looked at that and said, hey, those guys are getting all the attention. We need to step up our game and call ourselves ISIS K or call ourselves ISIS Philippines in order to kind of cash in on all that attention. And we want to be the cool kids on the block too. Now, with all of this, all these different, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hashishabi in Syria and Iraq, all of that is Tehran in the background showing their mastery of proxy hybrid warfare. And proxy hybrid warfare is the warfare of World War III. As I've said many times before, if you have nuclear armed states, they really cannot go to war with each other. It's just far too dangerous to provoke a state that has nuclear weapons like that. And so, you don't want to get yourself into a situation where somebody has to lose this war, and it ain't going to be us because we got nukes. And the other side says, well, it ain't going to be us because we got nukes too. That is a recipe for global destruction, and everybody knows it. So, because of the ease of entry, the low barrier to entry into warfare nowadays with insurgencies and this hybrid asymmetric warfare, war is taking on a completely different flavor. It's changing. And the United States was very well insulated from conventional war from our adversaries by the two giant oceans that lie on our east and on our west. But the United States is not insulated, hardly at all, from the new form of proxy hybrid warfare. And you've heard me talk about this a lot. I talk about it in my book, Death of Civilization, which you can get over at chuckholton.com. I don't know, do I have a copy of it here? No, I don't have a copy of it right here in my bookshelf right now. I'm here in West Virginia for a couple days, so I could sign a few books. If you want a signed copy of Death of Civilization, just send an email to info@holtonnews.com, info@holtonnews.com, and I can send out some signed copies. Good while supplies last, only in the United States, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I talk about it in the book that Iran's mastery of proxy hybrid warfare means that they have mastered the art of asymmetric warfare, pushing the crisis into the United States with saboteurs, agents provocateurs. These are saboteurs going around starting forest fires, destroying infrastructure, poisoning water wells, whipping up sentiments, whatever, fear, doing things that basically cost Americans money. And this is where it reaches you in your pocketbook. Very well could. I mean, as I mentioned, cyber crime last year alone was $9 trillion. Trillion with a T. Almost every one of us, well, virtually, without a doubt, every one of us has been affected financially by that $9 trillion bill of cyber warfare. And Iran, Russia, and China are the big three behind that. And I guarantee it's cost you money, because there's been a hospital that got hit with ransomware and you've had to pay a higher hospital bill because of what their costs were because of that. Or you've had to pay more for a product or service because of the additional cybersecurity that has to be added in to virtually everything. You've lost, likely, if you're like me, you've likely lost, I don't know, maybe a couple of days of your life at this point just logging into stuff, because you have to do the, two-factor authentication, and then you have to fill out a little puzzle, and then you have to get a text message on your phone, and then you got to put the code in, and then you got to have a password that's 97 characters long and has a haiku and some Gaelic runes in it. Make sure it's something that you can't remember, but don't write it down, whatever you do. And, if that's as frustrating for you as it is for me, that's a direct result of proxy hybrid warfare coming to your front door. There was a time when I was in Afghanistan and I was embedded with I think it was SEAL Team 7, actually. And they did a mission out to the Iranian border, near the Iranian border, to a little village out there that was, they believed, a hub of IEDs coming in from Iran. They were getting these shape charges from Iran and then forming them into IEDs and then distributing them throughout Afghanistan. So we dropped in on that village in the middle of the night, and we rounded up. There was a small village, maybe 25 houses. Rounded up all of the military age males and put them in one compound, and then kind of left the women and children alone while we interrogated the males to try to figure out who was dirty. There was one guy that just was not giving straight answers. He was being kind of cagey. He claimed to have lived there his whole life, and all the other guys said, we have no idea who that guy is. So he obviously wasn't telling us the truth. And so I remember sitting there, and I was watching this whole production, and one of the SEALs said there was another special forces troop there. This guy, I'm sorry, MARSOC, the Marine Special Operations guys. And then there was this MARSOC guy that they called Grape Ape, because he was enormous. He was like 6'8", and he was twice as wide as I am. And he put all his gear on and everything. The guy just looked like Goliath. I mean, he was amazing. He was huge. They had to map out 2 boat spaces every time we went on a helicopter ride or something for this guy, because he was that big. So when this guy was not giving him a straight answer, they said, hey, Grape Ape, hey, we need you over here. This guy's not being straight with us. Maybe you could do something about that. And Grape Ape just looks at the guy and goes, yeah. And this Afghan guy just wet himself like that. And Grape Ape picked him up and carried, with one arm, just picked him up off the ground and carried him bodily into this room, this little shed that was kind of in that compound. And I was kind of leaning against the door of that, so I got out of the way as he walked by. And then I kind of stuck my head in there and was watching, and he just started doing what we used to euphemistically call wall-to-wall counseling with guys. So he just started bouncing him off every wall in that shed and just tossing him around like a rag doll. And so, I mean, I'm there as a journalist. I'm filming. And so I said, hey, maybe I shouldn't be filming this. And because we're kind of abusing a detainee here. And he kind of looks up and he says, well, you got a problem with this? And I said, you know, from now on, every time I go through airport security, I'm going to think of this guy, because it's people like him that make it so that the rest of us can't have nice things, have to go through, you know, the indignities of TSA every time we go to the airport. So hit him once for me. Uh, well, we got 2,200 people online, folks, and so please go hit the like button. That really helps, actually. It tells YouTube that more people need to see this video. And so if you have a second, I mean, it doesn't cost you anything. Just go while I'm talking. Click over there till you can see the little thumbs up button, and just click that button. And that will do, that'll help a lot. And again, it's free, doesn't cost you anything. If you want to support my work, you can go to the link tree, which Mrs. Tomlin has graciously pinned to the top of the chat. And there's Venmo and PayPal and Cash App and all that stuff there. Or just go over to chuckholton.com, my locals page, which is kind of like Patreon. And you can become a supporter over there and support my work. Help me continue to do this. As a matter of fact, this morning, I finally got our nonprofit set up, which we've been working on for some time, along with one of our generous supporters here. And so very soon, you're going to be able to donate to some of the things that we do, humanitarian aid for people in the war zones that I travel to, and these single mothers in Colombia that we support with training, job training, and micro loans and things like that. You'll be able to donate to all of that and get a write-off because we got a 501c3. So that's coming. I just have to get a bank account for it now, and then we'll be all set. The other reason that we're doing that is because, and I'm announcing this really for the first time publicly, we have been working on something behind the scenes for years now to start an academy for young men here in West Virginia that seeks to make young men more capable, competent, and confident with hands-on skills like, well, everything from construction to mechanics to uh, search and rescue to weapons handling to uh, firefighting to, I mean, on and on and on. We're looking at creating the kind of Jason Bourne school that I would have wanted to go to when I was a young man. And so we're forming this nonprofit in order to do that. Patty says, you talk about the bad you think President Trump is doing, but not the good he's doing since being in office. I have talked about the good that he's doing a lot, Patty. You're not listening, apparently, because I will make this very clear that President Trump on his worst day is 10 times better than a President Biden or President Harris would have been on their best day. And President Trump's got good motives, but there are some things that he doesn't understand about foreign policy, obviously. And what I don't like about what bothers me about President Trump is his penchant for saying things that just are not so. claiming that he's going to do things that there's no way he could really do, or lying about the reasons for needing to do a certain thing, like take over the Panama Canal. That I have a problem with. I think that we should hold our leaders to a very high standard when it comes to honesty, forthrightness, and President Trump tends to exaggerate a lot, very, very badly. And especially when he exaggerates about what he's going to do and then he doesn't follow up and do it, that makes our allies and our adversaries less confident in America. See, both our allies and our adversaries should be confident in America, that America will be the best friend you could possibly have or the worst enemy you could possibly have. Take your pick. Everyone on planet Earth, every country around the world should know beyond a shadow of a doubt that America will be your best friend or your worst enemy, and the choice is up to you. But when President Trump says he's going to bring hell on Gaza if they don't release the hostages, and then he doesn't, he proceeds to just sort of, forget about that, or try to claim that, well, Israel's going to do it for us. That wasn't what he said. And what that does is it emboldens our enemies and it shakes our alliances to the core, to where now what we're seeing is that our allies, our NATO allies, are essentially sidelining our country. They're sidelining President Trump. They're going ahead and they're making deals and having conversations without even including America in the mix. Is that really what you want? Now, I realize he's only been in office for a few months, and I'm willing to, like I say, you heard me say at the beginning of this thing, I hope to be proven wrong. I hope he comes through and he follows up word for word on everything that he threatened to do to the Houthis, to the Iranians, and everybody else. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Now, one other thing that the president that has not been very popular, that President Trump has done in the last couple of days, is decide that he wants to accept a $400 million flying palace from Qatar as a stand-in for the Air Force One jet, which has been delayed till 2029. So the Air Force One that they have now is aging. It's still functional, but it's aging. And so Trump wants this much larger, much fancier plane. Well, I mean, even Trump's allies are saying this is a bad idea. Trump is trying to make the case that, you'd be stupid to not take a $400 million gift. I mean, who wouldn't do that? Well, if the gift is coming from a state sponsor of terrorism, that's kind of a bad thing. And if the gift is coming from a country that has been proven to be undermining American culture through American universities being funded by the Qataris, causing division and anger in our culture, in our country, well, that's probably not a great idea. You know what I mean? Just not the best idea. To say nothing of the fact that this is a gigantic flying bug. I mean, there's no chance that that plane does not have espionage technology in it if they're going to give it to President Trump. There's virtually no chance that they are not bugging that plane 9 ways from Sunday. So I mean, I think most people, when they look at that, go, yeah, maybe that's not the best idea. Now I get it. You want to, I mean, I saw the pictures of the inside of that plane, and it's a really nice plane, but I'm not sure it's the best idea to be flying our commander in chief around in a plane that was given to us by somebody who is undermining our country actively with the money that they have. Okay. So let's move on. Again, I don't enjoy criticizing President Trump. I voted for President Trump. I'm very glad he's our president because the alternative would have been orders of magnitude worse. And he's done a lot of good, especially in the area of immigration, a lot of good, and the U.S. military. Pete Hegseth is turning the U.S. military around, doing almost exactly what I would have done if I was the Secretary of Defense. They're wiping out all this diversity, equity, and inclusion garbage from the whole federal government. That is fantastic. They're closing down entire government agencies that should have been closed down decades ago, like the Department of Education, USAID. So they're doing all kinds of great stuff. And I'm happy, very, very happy to give President Trump kudos for hiring the right kind of people who will do those sorts of things. But he's got this blind spot when it comes to, you know, foreign policy. And unfortunately, that's my forte because I spend most of my time traveling to the places, on the ground in places that are in the news and are requiring American involvement one way or another. And so I I'm doing the best I can. Trying to be fair to President Trump, but I'm not a sycophant. And I'm not just going to be the kind of guy that just cheerleads our leader, especially if he's doing something I think is immoral. And lying is immoral. I call me a simpleton, but I learned that when I was a little boy. That exaggeration is lying, and lying is immoral. So we should call that out in our leaders if we see it. Now, somebody asked here, do you think it's sad? PC asked, do you think it's sad Trump is skipping Israel on his Middle East trip? Kind of. I mean, the Israelis are they're disappointed at that, but I understand why Trump isn't going to Israel on this trip because he's trying to refrain from doing anything that would harm his chances at striking business deals in Saudi Arabia. So let's talk about that for a minute because you're talking about massive amounts of money. The Emiratis alone have agreed to invest almost right at $1 trillion in the US economy over the next 10 years. The Saudis are at $660 billion. The Qataris are 400 and something, I think. So this is pretty massive, pretty massive. We're talking about some serious business deals. And this is everything from technology to aviation to military, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I think it's great, but Trump needs to go there and do business. Fluffy Birdie says, why don't you meet with Trump? Well, if you've got his phone number, send it to me and I'll give him a call. And I'm sure he'll be happy to sit down with me. That always cracks me up when people say that. Like I could just go knock on his door. Like, no problem. I'll just go meet with Trump. Yeah, sure. I'm not near as high profile and important as you apparently think I am. um, but The Saudis are a very interesting study here because, in some ways, the Saudis are actively working against the US and Israel in this conflict, but they're doing it really under the table. And in other ways, the Saudis are embracing America and, yes, we're your friends and we're even willing to, be friends with Israel a little to some extent. Now, look at how the Saudis have reacted to the war in Gaza, for example. They have condemned Israel for the killing that's happened in Gaza. No real mention whatsoever. No, certainly no condemnation of Hamas for pulling off October 7th. If anybody in the Saudi government criticized Hamas for the atrocities that they perpetrated on Israel, I missed it. Maybe you didn't. If you saw them denounce Hamas, please send me that clip. I'd like to see that. So on one hand, they are sort of rooting for Hamas over here. And it's been reported that the Saudis have some back channel communications with Hamas. However, Hamas is a proxy of Iran. And the Saudis and the Iranians, they're not friends. They don't get along. So the Saudis don't really want to throw their weight behind Iran by helping Hamas or anything like that. All they're doing is making sort of vague pronouncements about we're standing in solidarity with our Muslim brothers, that sort of thing. Yeah, whatever. Now, can we cash the checks from the United States? So the Saudi crown prince, we will abbreviate his name to MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. His vision for Saudi Arabia is to transform that country into a shining city on the hill, into the Singapore of the Middle East. Of course, they have vast amounts of oil wealth in Saudi Arabia, but for years now, the Saudis have looked ahead to the future and said, petroleum is probably not going to be the place to be in 20 or 30 years. Now, I happen to think they're wrong about that because when you look at the total amount, there's a great book on this subject, by the way, but when you look at the total amount of petroleum that is proven, we have the proven reserves around the world, just what we know is there that we could get to and extract. We have, at the current rate that we're using petroleum products, take a guess how long that petroleum will last. We're talking about all of the proven reserves, and they're finding more all the time. But I mean, so assuming we never find another drop of oil over what's already been found, and we continue to use it at the same rate that we're using it right now, how many years do you think it'll be before that oil runs out? Put your answer in the chat. Let's see what you guys think. Suffice it to say, Saudi Arabia has one of the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. I'll answer that question in just a minute. They have taken the oil wealth that they've generated. Most of it is going to the royal family, right? And to some and their extended family. So we got 500, 150, too long, 150, 300, 75, 5 years, Garrett says. Okay. Well, the studies that I've read, there's, like I said, a great book on this subject. I'm trying to remember the name of it exactly. It's The Case for Petroleum or something like that is the name of the book. There's enough proven oil reserves out there right now to last 3,000 years at the current burn rate. So I don't think we have to worry about running out of oil. But all that said, MBS is not taking any chances. And so years ago, they started investing a portion of their oil profits into what they call a sovereign wealth fund. Now, there are many countries around the world that have sovereign wealth funds. The United States is not one of them yet, although President Trump has suggested that we start a sovereign wealth fund in the US, and that'd be a good idea. It's kind of weird considering that our national debt is now more than 120% of our gross domestic product to think we have any money to save anywhere. We just need to pay down that debt. That'd be a great investment. Let's just pay off the debt. But Saudi Arabia has very, very little federal debt, national debt, something like 6 or 7% of GDP. Again, the United States is 120% of GDP. So very little, almost nothing. And they've saved up almost, like next year, they'll have $1 trillion in their sovereign wealth fund. And what they want to do with that is they want to invest it in something that will diversify their cash flow over time as dependence on oil goes down. And so they're planning all these massive construction projects in Saudi Arabia. I went to see one of them. It's called Neom, or they also call it the Line. Neom is a futuristic city in the desert, planned city, and it's only 150 yards wide, and it's 170 kilometers long. 170 kilometers long, and there will be no cars and no streets in that whole city. And they're building it right now. It goes right past the foot of Mount Sinai. I went and climbed Mount Sinai a couple years ago in Saudi Arabia, and I saw them breaking ground for the construction of Neom. And it's going to be like this. I think it's about 50 stories tall and 170 kilometers long with just a train that goes back and forth. And it's a 15-minute city. You can just walk to everything you need within 15 minutes. Now, who in their right mind would want to live in the middle of the Saudi Arabian desert in a giant glass tower that is completely dependent on air conditioning for survival? It's essentially like living in a space capsule on Mars, where you can never go out and see walk among the green trees and see the green grass and all that. The best you can do is, house plants. And you're going to live in a apartment that's about the size of my office here, and you're going to like it. The tiny house living. I don't know who exactly is going to want to live there, but MBS says that they're going to have 9 million people living in that one city someday. And they're spending $500 billion to build it. They're also building a giant sports complex and a giant resort complex on the Red Sea, trying to attract visitors. They've even talked about putting in a maglev rail system that will go directly from Israel across to Saudi Arabia, or Egypt across to Saudi Arabia, to make it easier for tourists to get over there. Now, I've been there, and let me tell you, that's no garden spot. It's red sand and rock. But MBS wants to turn it into a garden spot as much as possible. They are also engaging in sort of soft power exercises, which they call sports washing. I'm not sure why. Sports washing, where they're bringing in Formula One and WWE wrestling, and even artists like Justin Bieber to Saudi Arabia to give concerts in Riyadh. They paid Justin Bieber between 10 and $20 million. The government of Saudi Arabia. How do you get that gig? I mean, I'll go dance around on stage and grab my crotch and sing it in falsetto voice if they want to pay me 10 or $20 million to do so. Why not? Heck yeah. But this is all a intentional plan to try to diversify the cash flow for the kingdom and to increase their global presence, right? So they can't afford to get directly involved in this war against Israel on either side, either the Hamas side or the Israeli side. Now, they have done some back channel intelligence sharing with Israel throughout this war because they have a common enemy in Iran. But keep in mind that the kingdom of Saudi Arabia is not squeaky clean when it comes to human rights. So, as President Trump is sitting down to try to ink business deals with these guys, it pays to keep in mind that, you know, they chopped up a journalist in their embassy and smuggled him out. And that they, last year alone, beheaded something like 240 people. In one day last year in 2024, they beheaded 81 men in a public square in Saudi Arabia. These are the people that were asking for business deals. It just, with all of their talk of, uh, progress. Oh, we're going to let women drive now. Great. But women are still considered property. They might be able to drive, but they still have to wear the burqa, and they're still considered property by their husbands or fathers or brothers. So now this is one thing that they say they're not going to discuss, but it would be surprising to me if they didn't, is the fact that President Trump's sons went over to Saudi Arabia and just inked a $2 billion deal around starting their own crypto mining company. I believe that's what it was about, with the Saudis, and they want to take it public. Now, if we criticized President Biden for allowing his son Hunter to gallivant around the world, cashing in on the Biden name to do business deals with Burisma and Chinese companies and all sorts of things, should we not, just for the sake of intellectual honesty, be a little reticent to get excited about President Trump? Just even if there's a Chinese firewall between, maybe that's not the best thing to say, because anything that's Chinese is not going to be very good quality. A Swiss firewall between the presidency and Eric Trump, and the business dealings that they're doing around the world. Shouldn't we be a little reticent to just applaud like good little seals? I don't know. I don't know. All right, we got 2,800 people online. I just want to mention again, folks, please go to chuckholton.com and subscribe over there. You can watch my new documentary if you're a supporter, just released a couple days ago, my new documentary titled The Last Man. And I think you're going to love it if you like outdoors or farming or homesteading or prepping or anything like that. You talk about some hardcore doomsday preppers. I went and found a guy, just him and his wife are the last two people that live in this village. There's no other human being in sight of this village. They live up 7,000 feet above sea level, overlooking the border with Iran. And it's a fascinating life that they lead. And I'm increasingly tempted to just flush everything and go move in next door to them and just live the idyllic life of a subsistence farmer. You've probably had fantasies like that too from time to time. Okay, so I look, I do not believe President Trump is corrupt, and I don't believe I've met his sons, and I've actually talked at length with his sons, and I don't think they're corrupt either. But I think that we have to be concerned about optics, and we certainly were concerned about the optics when it was the crack pipe smoking jackwagon Hunter Biden that was going around the world and was making business deals. And so I don't know, it seems to me like the I don't even think I don't begrudge them going out and making money. I mean, I applaud that. I think that doing business is a noble thing and we ought to be doing it. But we just need to be careful about those guys showing up in Saudi Arabia, inking a deal last week, and then this week their dad is going over there to ink more business deals and maybe accept a $400 million airplane from the Qataris. I just, wow, that's, oh, that kind of seems a little sketchy to me. Am I the only one? Are you okay with this? It seems like some of you are like, I don't see anything wrong with that. Okay, maybe it's just me. Could be. I don't know. So, folks, I'm going to be here in West Virginia for a couple more days. So, like I said, if you'd like a signed copy of any of my books, I've got some of them. I think I have most of my books here. Let's see. I've got copies of Making Men, and I've got copies of Prowess, The Man You Were Meant to Be. And I've got copies of my story of, kind of my time in the military, A More Elite Soldier. And I have copies of my newest book, which is Death of Civilization. If you'd like a signed copy of any of those books, they make great graduation gifts for the young men in your life, whatever. Just send an email to info@holtonnews.com and tell Amy which book you want. Make sure you include your address, and then we'll arrange payment. All of my books are just $10. $10 is easy, simple. Just shoot me $10 and we can get you a signed book while I'm here. So we've got a lot more coming, and we're working real hard on some things, like I said, with this nonprofit to give you the ability to donate to help people through the hot zone and actually get a write-off for it. So for now, I'm going to go putter around my farm and get a few things done that I need to do in the very short time that I'm here at the lodge. And we will see you guys again next time. So God bless you. Please like and share this podcast. If you're not subscribed, why not? Please subscribe, and we'll see you again next time.